This video covers the IGCSE Biology Objective 1.3.6 on the 2025 CAIE syllabus to classify organisms into the 5 kingdoms, including the plant kingdom. So as we go into kingdom classification, let's remind ourselves of the 5 kingdoms. That is protist, plant, fungi, animals, and prokaryotes, also known as bacteria. So what we want to do when we're classifying into kingdoms is to ask ourselves a series of questions about the cells of these organisms. So first we want to consider, is the organism multicellular or unicellular? And you can usually tell that just by looking at the whole organism. And then you want to ask yourself questions about the cells of the organism. So, does it have a membrane-bound nucleus? If it does, then it can go into one of several kingdoms. If it does not, then it will belong to one kingdom. Does it have a cell wall and or chloroplast, combination together? Does it just have a cell wall? Does it have a chloroplast? Is it animal-like? Is the cell animal-like, as in does it consume food? Or is it plant-like? Does it make its own food? So those are the series of questions you would ask yourself in order to determine which kingdom you would classify an unknown organism into. So let's take a look at a few examples. So here is an example of an organism. Clearly it is one cell big. So let's ask ourselves some questions. Does it have a membrane-bound nucleus? The answer is yes. You can clearly see the dark green circular organelle closer to the bottom of the organism. That is a clear defined nucleus. Does it have a cell wall and or chloroplast? Well, it does have a cell wall. You can see that very thick green structure around the cell. Does it have chloroplast? And the answer there is no. Chloroplast would be fairly large in relation to the other structures in the cytoplasm, and so the answer is no. Now, what might be throwing you off with this one is that it looks green, and that is because it has been dyed green in order to see the structures more clearly. So the fact that it is dyed green does not mean that it is actually having chlorophyll pigment in it. So that is something that is a little confusing. Is it animal-like or plant-like? Well, we can't really tell from this, and based on some of the other characteristics, you probably already know that it's not a protist. It's not a prokaryote. So that leaves us with fungi, plant, and animal. And since this is one cell big, the only possible answer there is that it is a fungi. And indeed, that is true. This particular cell is a yeast cell. All right, let's take a look at this organism. It is one cell big again. So again, we ask ourselves a series of questions. Does it have a membrane-bound nucleus? The answer is no. We can clearly see that the DNA is just incorporated into the cytoplasm. There is no clear defined nucleus. Now, we could stop just there because hopefully you've identified it at this point as to which kingdom it belongs to, but let's just continue because there are the other structures to consider. Does it have a cell wall? Yes. Does it have chloroplasts? No. The fact whether it's animal-like or plant-like, we don't really need to consider because it is not a protist. Clearly, because it does not have a membrane-bound nucleus, this is a prokaryote, meaning that this organism is indeed a bacteria. All right, let us consider this unicellular organism. The first question is, does it have a membrane-bound nucleus? Now, with this type of organism, it's a little bit hard to see because we don't have anything dyed. This is actually a living organism that you would be looking at under the microscope. It would be moving around. It has little cilia all around its body that enable it to swim around in fresh water. So it might be hard to see some of the structures. So while it may be difficult to see the nucleus, it does indeed have a membrane-bound nucleus. All right, it does not have a cell wall. Clearly, there's no thick layer around it. There's just a cell membrane. Does it have chloroplast? The answer there is yes. You can clearly see some green structures. This is not dyed, like I said, because it is still alive. And does it behave like an animal or a plant? Well, it is only one cell big, so it clearly is not a plant cell. So the only other type of organism that we know of that does have chloroplast, that is one cell big, is a protist, and that would be what this organism is. It is indeed a protist called a paramecium. All right, so let's consider now plant classification. Let's remind ourselves about plant classification. When we're classifying plants, we are looking at only flowering plants, and flowering plants are put into two categories, monocots and dicots. So we've got 4 ways to separate monocots and dicots. We've got the seed, the leaf, the stem, and the flower. When we are looking at the seed of a plant, we want to see, does that have 1 cotyledon or 2 cotyledons? The major example of this is a maize kernel versus a groundnut. Maize kernel only has 1 cotyledon. It doesn't separate into 2 parts like a groundnut does. Then we can look at the leaf of the plant. If the leaf has parallel veins, then it is a monocot. If it has branching veins or a network of veins, then it is a dicot. Again, parallel veins would be something like maize or grass, and branching veins would be any typical plant, like an oak tree or an acacia tree or something like that. We can also look at the stem. If we're able to cut the stem and clearly look at it, we could see how the vascular tissue, which we'll learn about later, is scattered throughout the stem. In a monocot, there's no organization to it at all. It's just randomly scattered, whereas in a dicot, we see bundles that are arranged in a circular pattern closer to the edge of the stem. And then we can look at the flower of the plant. So in a monocot, the flower would have a flower petal in 3 parts, meaning that the number of petals is divisible by 3 only. For dicots, the flower petals would be in 4 or 5s. So you might find a flower with 4 petals or 5 petals, or a number of petals that is divisible by 4 or 5. So let's take a look at some examples. All right, so if we consider all of the different aspects of the plant classification that we've just gone through, the first picture that we're looking at on the left is flower petals. And if we count the flower petals, we can see that there are 6 of them, which is divisible by 3, making this a monocot flower. The second picture is the picture of a peanut or a groundnut, and we can see there that the seed is split into 2 parts, meaning that it is a dicot. The third picture has a flower. I think that's hibiscus. And if we count the petals, there are 5 petals, meaning that this is a dicot. The next picture, what we're looking at is corn or maize, but we're looking at the leaf itself, and you can see that all of the leafy parts of the plant have parallel veins, meaning that it is a monocot. And finally, we're looking at rice. Rice is a seed of the rice plant. And if we look at a rice kernel, it does not split. It's just one whole piece itself. There's only one seed to it, meaning that it is a monocot.